The stem of the crystal flute vibrated under his palms, and the chandeliers above the dining room trembled as if the light itself might shatter. He was a storm in a tailored suit, voice like thunder over the silver sea outside the windows, stripping dignity from the room. And then the waitress lifted her chin, laid one hand flat on her apron to still her trembling, and said one sentence that turned the room to glass. Before we begin, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, feel free to share where you're watching from. It's always beautiful to see how far stories like this can travel. Enjoy the story. They called it Edgewater for the way the waves threw themselves against the stone below the terrace. In the evenings, the ocean glowed like an ember, swallowing the sun as if it were feeding on fire. The restaurant smelled of lemon peels, thyme, and money. An aperture of glass windows threw the room wide to the horizon, tables draped in white, cutlery aligned as if awaiting inspection. Outside, gulls performed the dumb rituals of greedy birds. Inside, people did the very same. He entered as a hush. For a moment, even the wind seemed interested in him. Adrian Vale. His name carried rumor and fidelity in equal measure, a billionaire with eyes like he learned to be generous from a ledger, a man whose towers threw shadows over the city. He wore white sleeveless contempt over a navy shell of a suit. 2 bodyguards cut a wedge through the staff without touching anyone, a choreography of practiced rudeness. And then his voice broke the quiet. "Is this what you call ready?" He held up a wineglass by the lip with 2 fingers as if it were a diseased animal. "Smudged, and we've been here 30 seconds. 30. His jaw worked the words like they tasted bad. The manager, Addison, a woman with a pencil behind her ear and a calendar tattooed in her eyes, smiled in apology already dissolved into sweat. The sommelier whitened. At the bar, the bartender polished the air. The sea kept licking the stones as if it had been doing so for 1,000 years and would for 1,000 more. Mara was 4 feet away, carrying a bread basket heavy with rosemary rolls and warm air. She had done this 1,000 times, step, balance, place, smile, and her body did it without consulting her. Her heart, however, took the stairs 2 at a time and lost its balance at the landing. He never looked at the person in front of him until he needed to. To him, people were fixtures, lights that either worked or didn't. But when he finally looked at her, rage refocusing, his eyes caught on a face he did not know, and yet that unsettled him, like déjà vu in reverse. Mara recognized him. Not from television or magazine covers, which gave him a gentle air his face didn't have in person, the softness of a portraitist who loves to be loved. She recognized his mouth. She had seen it written in black ink on the line where it said attending physician, Adrian Vale, M.D. No. Not physician. Not doctor, name of employer, Vale Construction Group. Signature, A. Vale. She had traced the letters with her finger the night her husband's death certificate arrived, and the city pinned the paper to their grief, the way a person might pin a butterfly for study. The signature had been elegant, detached, perfect. Now that mouth tore at her. "You," he said, pointing to the glass to her, to the whole room with a flick that decided for them. "Fix this. I have investors about to walk through the door, and if they see fingerprints and disorganization, they will assume incompetence is systemic." "Is it systemic, miss?" "Delgado," she said. "Mara Delgado." He made the name a small thing. "Right, Miss Delgado, do you want to work in a place that fails before it begins?" Her mouth moved. The room held its breath. The apology lined up on her tongue like soldiers, but the apology had been getting old lately. It had grown heavy, and there it was in her mouth, a word with the wrong address. She did not apologize. She set the bread basket down with the grace of placing something fragile and said quietly, in a voice that was more steel for being soft, "Your name is on my husband's death certificate." A fork stopped midway to a mouth. A gull beyond the glass swayed in midair as if the wind itself skipped a beat. Addison let out a half-syllable that had polished itself into silence before anyone could hear it. The bodyguards became statues whose eyes were doors suddenly shut. And Adrian's mouth, the elegant signature of a man accustomed to leaving his mark on anything but himself, opened and closed like a fish dragged onto the deck. He was not used to hearing sentences that did not obey him. He was not used to a mouth like hers pointing him back to a thing he no longer controlled. "What?" he said. One word, suddenly light. Mara held his gaze. In her mind, Mateo's hands, a welder's hands, strong with an intimacy of heat and iron, brushed against hers when he left for work the last time, grease and tenderness making the same promise. She thought of the certificate, of the rectangle of paper that had found them like a bureaucratic storm note. She thought of the way her son would press his ear to her chest and say, "Mama, your heart sounds like a train." She did not repeat herself. She only nodded once. Mateo Delgado, Vale Tower Project, 3 summers ago. Scaffolding collapsed. He knew. You cannot build a city without knowing who it killed. You can pretend not to remember, you can drown it in deals and dinners, but it will come and stand in front of you in a white apron with your smudge on her glass and your name in her mouth. Adrian felt the room adjust around him. He was used to rooms adjusting, but this felt like a surgeon's table being wheeled away from him at the same time as he needed it. He looked for the investor he was set to meet, Miss Wen, the cool half-myth idea of money that could float even towers, and saw that she had entered quietly, a woman in a simple black dress, hair pinned like a decision, eyes taking more than light. She stood near the aquarium of wine bottles and watched the whole thing, an unflinching pupil dilated. "No," he said reflexively, the way you might tell gravity not to happen. "No, Mr. Vale," Addison began, "perhaps I can show you to—" "Stay," he told her, and to the bodyguards, "stand down," and to the air, He took his hands off the glass as if it might burn him. He took a breath as if it owed him something, and then, because there was nowhere else to go, he looked at Mara. "Come with me," he said, and started toward the terrace doors as if he still owned the world. Mara did not move. The bodies of people have a memory for violence. Hers remembered falling without falling, mornings she had to choose between the bus and bananas, the way sound changes in a room when a man decides it belongs to him. She picked up the bread basket, because doing made thinking possible, and followed at a distance that was her own choice. The terrace opened onto a sky that lay flat as a blade. Out there the wind did not understand money. It grabbed his scarf and used it as a flag. The bodyguards kept their distance enough to keep the view from being all a tableau of threat. "Say what you need to say," he told her, voice lower now, the volume turned down but the intensity still red. "Do you want me to apologize? To grovel? To what?" She laughed, but it fell out of her mouth like someone knocked it loose. "I want you to stop shouting at people whose names you don't bother to learn." Somewhere relief, somewhere else offense, all of it inside him like weather. "I am under pressure," he said. "That is not the same as having the right to break people in front of you." A turn cut the sky between them with its useless scream. In the dining room behind the glass, faces tilted toward a 2-person stage like a theater built by accident. "My husband went to work," she said, "because we needed to pay rent. Because he was proud to put your name on buildings we used to walk by together and say, 'Imagine.' He told me the week before he died that the scaffolding was rusted, that it shook, that the foreman said stop being dramatic, that the job had to finish on time. He told me he wrote to his supervisor. He told me they won't listen to me, but they might listen to someone with a last name that means something. And Mr. Vale, when he fell, the whole neighborhood heard the metal scream." He swallowed. His throat did the work of getting smaller and wider at the same time. "I didn't know," he said, the first honest sentence he had used all day. "It came out wrong because it was late. I mean, of course I knew about the accident, but not you, not him." "I wrote you," she said. He blinked slowly, as if he could correct his sight by closing his eyes harder. "No one showed me any letters." Inside the restaurant, Miss Wen turned her face to the side like a painter adjusting the light. Addison said in a whisper, "I'm going to," and then stopped speaking because there is only so much you can do when truth arranges itself on your tables. He had built an empire out of saying no. He had learned as a boy in crumbling apartment hallways that feeling does not pay. That anything that softens you also unmakes you. He had learned to lift the weight of being the person nobody could hurt because there were no handles on him. And there, on a terrace he had chosen because the ocean seemed like something that would agree with him, he stood handle-shaped. "My legal team handles," he began. "Emails," she said. "Yes, settlements, non-disclosure agreements." You sent men in suits who smelled like citrus and victory. They asked me to sign a piece of paper and offered me a number like it was enough to teach my son how to fill the shape his father used to stand in. He had hired the best. The whole world had looked tidy for him because he paid good sweepers. But sometimes the thing you kick under the rug grows teeth. "What do you want now?" he asked. Quietly now. Not the question of a man accustomed to losing. The question of someone who briefly, dangerously, suspects that he might already have. Mara bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted iron, the element of both courage and blood. "I came to work today," she said, "because my rent is due on Tuesday and because Chef Nico makes the lemon tart the way my mother used to, with a crust that lets your teeth in and citrus like light. I did not come here to see you. If you are meeting investors, then meet them. If you're going to build another tower, may it stand and not fall. I wanted you to know that your voice goes through people like a thing with knives, and that your name can do that too. When I told you about Mateo, I wanted the blade to turn back, if only for a second." He was silent. He hadn't noticed Miss Wen had stepped outside. He felt her before he saw her, which terrified him because he had guarded himself against feeling anyone. "Mr. Vale," she said, voice textured like the silk of her dress. "Do I need to return to my car?" Adrian's mouth assembled a plea for time with a confidence he did not feel. "Please, a moment, Miss." "When," she said, sparing him the indignity of misnaming her. "I know who she is. I read people. It is how I decide who to trust. I prefer to watch before I invest." He had never been made to feel 12 years old by a woman older than him before. He hated it. He welcomed it like a slap that clears your vision. "You have a child," Miss Wen said to Mara without turning her head much. "How old?" "5, Mara said. "He thinks owls can become tired of flying and one day decide to walk everywhere." "What's his name?" "Theo," she said, and the word was a bell rung lightly. "If I invested," Miss Wen said to Adrian, "it would not be because your projections are extraordinary, they are, but because you know when the wind changes to lean into it, and the wind changed." He did not need more lessons. He needed something not to break. "I never meant," he began. "Oh, you did," Mara said, because she had no more room for minimizing things to make them palatable. "You meant to be seen being angry because it means you're still in control. You meant to make everyone feel how much you could change their day. That is its own kind of theft." He looked at her and did not see a waitress anymore. He saw the archives of his choices. Addison, inside, watched the door the way a person watches a drawer with a knife in it, afraid and oddly fascinated for no good reason. The sommelier ran a towel over a glass that did not need it. Chef Nico leaned one shoulder against the kitchen door, hair like a brush loaded with white paint, eyes like a storm that has learned patience. He looked at Chef Nico as if asking something silently. Nico shrugged. He had fed men richer and poorer into the same quiet. "Miss Delgado," Adrian said finally, Would you sit with me for a moment? I can ask Addison to cover your tables. I know I have no right to ask." "That," she said, "is correct." But she sat. You do not teach people mercy with bribes or speeches. You ask them to sit, to share the same weather, to see if there is room in the air for more than one breath. When they sat, the chairs made the small-sized chairs make when their legs accept weight. He folded his hands so that they were not fists. She placed hers on her knees to keep from shaking. "There is something you don't know about me," he said, so low that only the wind could scold him for it. "Everyone knows my work. They think it explains me. But before my father died, he built houses with his own hands. He did it badly. He made more mistakes than walls. He drank as if it were a job. He was cruel. And when he was kind in a way that made you pay for it later. When he died, he left me nothing anyone could live inside. I said I would be the opposite, that I would build things so perfectly they would stop needing anyone's patience. I did not realize that making a thing perfect can kill the people inside it, too." He had not spoken about his father in years. He had kept his old things inside new ones and hoped the light that leaked through looked like hunger instead of harm. He looked at his hands, the hands that signed documents that allowed bolts to be tightened or left to loosen. He wondered about all the metal in his life. He wondered how to put it down. Mara watched him, and something in her softened without moving, Compassion is not forgiveness. It is a way of seeing what you hate without catching fire. I need to tell you something else, she said, about the single sentence. It wasn't the first thing I wanted to say. It's just the only one with space for both of us in it. She reached into the pocket of her apron and took out a folded piece of paper, creased so many times it might have remembered being a tree. It was a copy of a letter. Handwritten, Mateo's blocky hand tamed by trying to look respectful. Dear Supervisor, it said. The scaffolding on Section C feels unstable. The bolts are stripped. The planks move. We flagged it 2 weeks ago. We need more time and for Inspector to come back. If we rush this, someone will get hurt. I'm not dramatic. I'm 28 and my son just learned to whistle and I want to teach him to build a kite. Respectfully, M. Delgado. At the bottom, a scrawl in a different ink, received, talk to Denby. He says it's fine, proceed. Below that, a stamp, Vale Construction Group, followed by a signature not his. He knew the signature. He had hired the man to be him when he could not be. Where did you get this? He asked. From a friend of my husband's, Juan. He kept it because the supervisor left, because the foreman left, because they were afraid of losing their jobs, and then because he moved to take care of his mother who is dying, and he found it inside a book he never finished reading. He sent it to me with a note that said, I think this belongs to you. It felt like being punched by a hand made of his own bones. Miss Wen put a hand on the back of a chair and did not pretend to look away. There were rumors, Adrian said. He hated the helplessness in the sentence. About Denby, about the inspectors, we changed contracts. We brought in a new safety officer, but I never. You did enough to say, look what we did, Mara said. That's different than doing enough to keep someone alive. Wind found the place behind his ear where his mother used to put her thumb when he was small and screaming. He had not thought of her in a week. He loved her. He found it hard to go see her because her eyes were sometimes anew whether every 15 minutes and he never brought an umbrella. He had told himself that time with her made him a child again. He had told himself he could not afford to stop being adult. He had told himself a lot of things that decent people tell themselves when they want to be forgiven in advance. My mother, he said softly, bakes lemon tarts. Used to. When she remembers, sometimes she will stand at the window of the memory ward and ask me if the boys have finished their homework. I don't have brothers. I know, Mara said. He looked at her. What? I work morning shifts at St. Agnes, for the days my rent won't stretch without them, she said, and smiled at the easy shock on his face, the way a person smiles at a child who has found out that water makes things wet. Your mother has a room by the garden. She calls me the girl with the gentle hands. She told me about your first bicycle, blue with silver tape. She told me you used to sing to the lemons when she zested them because you thought if you sang enough they would be sweet. She said if I see him again, tell him I'm sorry I didn't love my own mother enough to show him how to love me when I forgot my own name. He closed his eyes. His mother's apology put her hand on his head from across time and institutions, and suddenly he could not invent a version of himself that did not feel like glass. The terrace did something rooms do when someone lets go of something they should not have had to carry. It widened. Mr. Vale, Miss Wen said gently, I do not like men who pretend not to have to learn. They make poor partners. I like men who can adjust. Who can say sentences like, I'm sorry, I failed, I am changing course. He breathed like a man being taught to again. I cannot bring Mateo back, he said to Mara. I cannot, I would give. I have given so much to everything else, and I have never had to give a thing for nothing until now. I can begin with this. I will name what I did. I will ask an independent investigation into Vale Construction's practices, not the small kind, the real. I will fire Denby. He will be held. I will sit with every employee who wrote a letter like Mateo's, and I will read it out loud to a camera and then to their families. I will fund scholarships for the children of everyone who died building our city, even those not mine. It will not touch your grief. It is not supposed to. It is the shape of apology that has money in it, because that is the language I have had too long. But there is another language, too. What language is that? She asked, not unkindly. He looked at her the way you look at someone you are asking to teach you how to be human. The one where I listen. Inside, Addison sent Archero, the pastry chef, back to slice extra lemon tarts without knowing why. Chef Nico stepped out with a cup of coffee that had been waiting for this moment all morning, carrying it like an offering to an altar that did not announce itself. "I brought you both something hot," he said, setting the cups down. His eyes did not hunt for gratitude. He had grown plants and men for years and knew when either needed light. "Thank you, Nico," Mara said, "and to Adrian, say my husband's name." He looked at her and said, "Matteo Delgado?" Again, "Matteo." He let the syllables sit in his mouth until they felt like a promise. "You should know," she said, "that he used to eat the lemon peel when he thought I wasn't looking. He said it made him brave." "Brave," he repeated, almost smiling. "Then he would be furious with you for sitting here with me." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe he'd laugh because he laughed at everything he couldn't change." A gull tapped the glass with the absurd beak of a bird that did not understand time. The door opened. Addison stood in the threshold in that apologetic way people have when they don't know whose sadness deserves more money. "Miss Delgado," she said to Mara first because she was learning, "I've got your tables. Take your time." "Thank you," Mara said, and felt for the first time in months that she could breathe without carrying something else on the same breath. Miss Wen came closer to the table. Her hands did not fidget. She took out a card and placed it gently beside the coffee, not a business card. A thin piece of card with writing not printed in machines but small and neat, like someone terrified of lying. "I am investing," she said to Adrian without preamble. He looked up, a boy who had unlearned Christmas. "On one condition," she added, and he waited for the list of conditions men like him usually get. Asset composition, board seats, more money for more control. "That you do what you told her you would. Not because I am harsh, but because I am old and tired of loving men who forget the faces under the floors they stand on." She looked at Mara. "I know a law clinic. They work with workers like your Matteo. They have tape and patience. They don't make wonders except for the one where they stay. I'll have them call, if you want." Mara nodded, the daily gesture of saying yes to things that frighten your hope. "And Mr. Vale," Miss Wen continued, "call your mother. Then go see her, and bring her lemon tart. She is the investor that taught you first, and if you squander that, all this money is coins in the ocean." He laughed. He had not intended to. It felt like grace leaving his body and making room for something else. "I will," he said, "and then may I come by St. Agnes with my own hands, or will I be turned away?" "You may," Mara said, "but you must ask the nurse with the gray bun for permission. She is the boss of the universe in that ward." "I will," he said again. They sat for a long minute, three people at a small table, watching the line where the sea puts its mouth to the sky. "You know," Mara said, wiping a ghost of sugar from the corner of her mouth, "I should be angry still, and I am. I will be for a very long time. It just now is standing next to other things instead of inside them." He nodded. He remembered, as if from a far room, the meeting he had arrived for, the wheel of deals that never stopped moving unless you threw a body into it. He had thrown too many. He stood. "There is something I need to do before I go to St. Agnes," he said. "Nico." "Nico will call his cousin at the paper," Nico said. He had already decided. "She is more honest than anyone who will pay money to be so. She will bring a camera not for your face, but for your words. She will be gentle to those who deserve it. She will not be gentle to those who do not." Adrian's shoulders lowered half an inch. It was a start. Mara watched him and saw, overlaying the man in front of her, a boy singing nonsense to a lemon to make it sweeter. She felt the strange healing of being able to imagine him small. He left the terrace without the storm. He walked back into the restaurant and did something he had no practice in. He looked at every face. He said Addison's name, which made her eyes fill as if he had given her something. He said thank you. He did not say it like an old man repeating a script. He said it like someone for whom the word had grown a new room in his mouth. At the door, he turned and caught Mara's eye. He did not reach out. He had learned that reaching is not always a kindness. He nodded, crisp and real, and left. The article came out 2 days later. It was not a hit piece. It was a list of names, a confession, a blueprint. It ran beside photos of men with hands like Matteo's and women with hairnets, children with stubborn ears. The words read, "We failed. We fix. Here is how." It was the kind of writing that made enemies and friends indistinguishable except by what they did next. Denby was fired, not with a golden parachute, but with charges. An inspector sweated under lights he had not expected to ever face. Emails were pulled like corroded nails out of beams. The sound they made was ugly. It was necessary. Adrian went to St. Agnes with a lemon tart and a bouquet that looked embarrassed to be seen in public. He stood outside a door with a seaside painting on it and waited until the nurse with the gray bun looked up at him and said, "You can come in if you promise to make yourself smaller than your shadow." "Yes, ma'am," he said, and learned that the word ma'am fits in a mouth like as if it must. His mother looked up and found him. Sometimes she did. Sometimes she didn't. He sat beside her and cut the tart into squares and fed her little pieces, and she smacked her lips as if memory were a sweet you could taste in any weather. He took her hand and placed it where her thumb used to find space. She patted his cheek and called him by 3 different names and then his. When she got sleepy, he sat still and watched the light climb the walls. He cried silently the way men who haven't practiced do. He did not leave when someone else entered the room. He watched Mara push a linen cart in, hair pulled back, wrists folded into work. He watched her bend to fix a blanket over a shin. He watched her look at him with something almost like a joke. "How did it go with the nurse with the bun?" she asked. "She instructed me that I am not special," he said. It was clarifying. "Hold on to that," she said. "It will save you money." He snorted and then sobered because this was not a place for it. He looked at her son, Theo, small and bird-boned, perched by the window drawing a crane with the seriousness of doing something important. "May I meet him?" he asked, now used to asking permissions he didn't think he needed. "You may," she said, and called Theo over. The boy came, suspicious of anyone who made his mother's face look like a map of difficult thoughts. Adrian went down on one knee because he had learned you bend when small people are near or you frighten them. "I'm Adrian," he said. "I build big things." "The cranes," Theo said, eyes narrowing. He held up his drawing, a crane that had accidentally grown eyelashes but looked no less like a machine for it. "Yes," Adrian said. "Cranes." "They fall," Theo said, evaluating him. He was building a world that had room for truth. His mother had taught him well. "Yes," Adrian said, throat thick. "They fall. We're going to make them stop doing that." "You promise?" "Promises are only useful if you can check them," he said, surprising himself. "Would you like to come see how we check?" Theo looked at his mother. Mara weighed things, the education of letting your child decide hard things and the protection of telling him he could not. She said yes, because she wanted her son to grow up knowing the geometry of trust. They wore hard hats that dwarfed their scalps and neon vests that made them look like little lighthouses in a land of giants. They stood on a platform and watched men tighten bolts that previously would have been winked at. They watched a foreman tear up a schedule and write a new one without anyone reminding him that his job depended on speed instead of breath. They watched Adrian raise his voice only to tell someone to be careful. Mara watched Theo watch, and her heart wrote a paragraph of thank yous to a man who did not, on weekdays, know he had one. At home, the death certificate still hung in the little gallery of documents just inside their front door, because she had thought that if she saw it every day it would not hurt her by surprise. Over time, she found her eyes sliding past it not for lack of respect, but because grief, too, gets tired of being watched. Next to it, she added a new frame, a photo of Theo in a hard hat holding a rolled-up blueprint with hands already learning to be both gentle and strong. She did not frame a copy of the article. She had no interest in furnishing her walls with other people's remorse. She did frame the scholarship acceptance letter that came a year later, addressed to Theo Delgado, offering him summer classes at the Children's Science Museum on a grant from the Mateo Foundation for Worker Safety and Families, a name that had made her sit down on the floor the day the letter came. The signature at the bottom was familiar, but it did not burn her fingers when she traced it. It had learned to be used for naming things worth making. There were more names now under it, names that were not his. The board was run by women and men with hands like ridges. They did not accept a dime if it hid blood. They did not put their pictures on the website because the families did not want to be undone again by sudden kindnesses. They showed up to job sites with clipboards and asked questions that made people who never get asked questions straighten their backs. The city got a little safer, and then a little more. The ocean kept doing what it knows. We want to say stories end with kisses or explosions. This one ended in a restaurant, and then began again in 1,000 rooms where people made space for breath. Months later, on an ordinary night when the sea was out of jokes, Adrian returned to Edgewater alone. He did not bring bodyguards. He brought a human face and an appetite for lemon. He waited outside the kitchen because he had learned doors have thresholds you do not cross without permission. When Mara saw him, she felt something like surprise and something like the absence of it. She waved him in with her chin, because hands were for work. He stood watching her plate a dessert like a surgeon assembling a heart. "Busy?" he asked, a question that contains apology the way salt contains the sea. "Always," she said, wiping a smear of sugar with the edge of her apron. "You want the tart?" "Yes," he said. "And coffee, if your kindness is still under the counter somewhere." She poured. He sat at the bar and bit into the lemon and closed his eyes and groaned so sincerely she laughed, because you cannot fake that sound. He opened his eyes and there were tears in them again, but less. He said, "Your husband was brave," and she said, "He was funny," and they both nodded as if they had placed a piece into a puzzle that didn't need completion to be beautiful. He reached into his pocket and took out a folded note. Not fancy. Pencil smeared along the crease. He placed it on the counter and slid it to her the way you slide a boat into the river. She opened it. It read, "I know my name is on your husband's death certificate. I am working so that my name belongs to fewer harms and more helps, but your son's name will be on my favorite list. Not because of anything I did, but because he exists. Please tell him the Cranes are listening now." She folded the paper and tucked it into her apron, where it sat with other things that made her hands shake less. She did not thank him. She looked at him the way people look at each other when they are about to leave a room and want to say something that matters. "You can't buy this," she said, meaning forgiveness. "I know," he said and sipped his coffee. "I can be faithful to it, though." "You can try," she said. "Some days you will." He smiled, and the room did not object. As he stood to go, he placed a business card on the counter, not for her, but for Chef Nico. "For the bakery you always wanted to open," he told the old man. "Not a gift, an investment. With terms you will look at and laugh at, because you will feel how badly I want to be good." Nico lifted the card as if it were a trout just pulled from a river, slippery, alive, surprising. He did not say yes. He did not say no. He said, "I'll have my cousin's cousin look at it," which was better in a culture where the cousin's cousin always knew best. Outside, the ocean spread itself out and dared the moon to do anything about it. He stood at the railing and thought of all the rooms where his name had been a storm. He did not imagine himself as someone who had calmed the weather. He imagined a world where one day no one remembered what his shout sounded like. Inside, Mara cleared a table where a couple had left a smear of chocolate in the shape of a continent. She wiped it away and saw in the clean square of wood a little bit of future. She saw Mateo laughing at a lemon peel. She saw Theo, taller now, building a kite out of plans meant for heavier things, letting it fly. There will always be men who enter rooms like weather. There will always be women who make the weather stop. The sentence she had said would ripple out through the rest of her life like a stone thrown by a small boy with an earnest arm. "Your name is on my husband's death certificate." And in the echo came other sentences as necessary and sharp. "I am sorry. I will change. I will learn to be small where I am large and large where I am small. I will put my attention where it hurts to, and then keep it there. I will bake lemon tarts and bring them to the edge of the world and ask forgiveness from anybody passing by." Which is how the story ends, with tart on the tongue, a promise in the pocket, and the stubborn truth that sometimes people look at their harm and decide to become someone else. They do not do it once. They do it over and over like setting a table. They lay the fork and knife down in their new places, straighten them, and open the door. The room fills. People come in. People leave better. And the sea, who has heard every shout turn into a sentence and then into silence, keeps licking the stones, keeps forgiving, keeps refusing to forget.